and so this is called We Are Not Dogs. One of my favorite fables is the one about the dog and its reflection. The dog as a bone is immensely happy about it. I think the bone was stolen, but either way, as the dog returns to its home, they must cross a bridge. While crossing the bridge, the dog looks down and, not knowing what a reflection is, becomes jealous of the other dog in the water with a bone in their mouth. Rather than being satisfied with what they already had, the greedy dog jumps at the dog in the water, losing their own bone along the way. The traditional moral of this story is that it's foolish to be greedy, but I often think of this story for other reasons. The relationship to greed is clear, but I think of it for the misunderstanding, for not truly knowing what you are looking at and thinking the thing in front of you is different than it actually is. This added or alternate layer of self-reflective thinking that we as humans are able to apply to this tale, and which is essential to critical and conceptual art, is an idea I'll return to throughout this. I guess it would also be important to mention too the common struggle of finding balance between the role of teacher and artist, and then situated within the typical models that are provided to most undergraduate students who have an interest in both art making and teaching. Obviously this is for teachers, but I'm thinking specifically K through 12 teachers. So throughout my experience as an undergraduate studying art education, the K through 12 teachers that I observed in their classroom seemed to have little or no interest in being an artist or creating their own work, or at the very least, never felt the need to discuss it with me as a beginning art educator. As such, I don't believe I ever had a model of how to take on such a task, of how to be both an artist and a teacher at the same time. How was I supposed to fulfill the role of both? How was I supposed to make work without feeling as though one was being left to suffer due to lack of attention and focus? The robust studio environments and resources that many undergraduates have access to cease to exist upon graduation, and the time to create often goes along with it. This struggle, which many art students have experienced, stayed with me for many years after graduation, and the excuses and challenges are all too familiar. Not enough time, no dedicated space to create, etc. I continued to look at art and talk about art with other friends, but truthfully, I very rarely made my own work. This went on for several years as I was consumed with the tasks of teaching, creating example lessons for my students, grading assignments, displaying student work, and all the other expectations that come along with K through 12 teaching. I have found this to be a pretty typical tale for most K through 12 teachers, beginning and veterans alike. When I began to seriously consider returning to graduate school after a handful of years in the classroom, I knew I wanted to pursue a program that allowed me to continue teaching, but also one that would push me to begin thinking of myself more seriously as an artist. To get into a program like this, I knew I would need to build a portfolio, but struggled to find the time and space to work in a traditional studio setting, not to mention the cost of trying to seek out an additional studio space outside of my home. Because of this, and in an effort to reduce waste in my 6th through 8th grade public school classroom that didn't have a sink or running water, I decided to begin painting in my classroom using the leftover or mismixed acrylic paint from my students. At the end of each day, or every couple of days, I would collect the bad colors from students and would spend a little time after school using it up. Having studied painting as an undergraduate student, returning to painting felt safe. It was a challenge to use the unwanted colors from students, and I wanted to relearn how to move paint on a canvas. I would paint on several small 8x10 store-bought canvases until all the bad paint was gone, like the ones pictured here. As I was relearning and teaching myself how to create again, it was increasingly helpful to utilize creative constraints. All the same canvas size, all a small size, colors provided by students, and then use the paint until it was gone. Doing this was reinvigorating, and it was also about this time that I was part of a year-long professional development cohort where Jorge was one of the advising instructors. I'm certain that our writing or conversation from or with Jorge during this time shifted my thinking as I began to consider the other ways that my classroom could become material. I began to think of how I could use the time and space that I already spent in an art classroom or studio, talking about art, thinking about art, and making art, to make artwork that was more my own. How could I look to complicate the line between teaching, art making, and life? I began to collect and experiment in my classroom more and more. Acts that were necessary to provide students time and space to work, like cleaning dried paint off mixing trays, became an opportunity for me to save dried paint skins. At the end of the year, displaying all the paint skins in a shadow box frame recontextualized the waste as something new. This challenge allowed me to further investigate all aspects of teaching. Suddenly, staff meetings and committee meetings that had little or nothing to do with my specific art teaching were spaces where I could make drawings on Post-it notes with whatever drawing media was provided during the meeting, highlighters, colored pens, etc. Self-guided staff development became space to accomplish a practical goal of sorting scrap collage paper in my classroom, and also to test the potential of time as a material, taking the pieces of the scrap box and giving myself 1 hour to arrange colorful abstract collages and another hour to assemble them, like the ones here, resulting in 47 completed works of art. These playful but serious explorations of possibility continue to reveal themselves to me. During this period of illumination, I continued to read and seek out other artists working to make from material of their daily life. Alan Capro writes, "What happens when you pay close attention to anything, especially routine behavior, is that it changes. Attention alters what is attended." This idea and the history and practices of conceptual art allowed me to merge and blend my art, teaching, and life simply by looking more closely and highlighting the often mundane, essential tasks required by teachers. Capro further states that meaning here is not only variable and unfixed, but also inventive. It is what we add by imagination and interpretation to what we do. Looking carefully and playing with the routines required by our classrooms is a way to test them as material and use the structures and objects of teaching to create. Many of us, I think, are not intentionally blinded like the greedy dog with its bone, but rather occupied by busyness and frustration. We fill our lives so full and try to do more with what we have time for, more than what we have time for. This is often driven by deep-rooted capitalistic tendencies to acquire more wealth, status, and so on, in a pursuit of feeling fulfilled. And although the fable with the dog and his bone highlights human nature towards greed, I think it also reminds us that we often don't realize what we are looking at. I think that the lesson we can consider as readers, and not dogs, also emphasizes our ability as creative-minded, self-reflective beings, unlike the dog, to recontextualize our preconceived notions and expectations, and allows for us to situate our experiences in new ways. Rather than continue to be frustrated by the tasks required to exist as an artist or a teacher or a son or a partner, and separate my art, teaching, and life, I've decided to continue to seek out ways to blur the line that separate each of us, or separate each, leaving space for chance, play, and experimentation along the way. Often the thing right in front of you can be more fulfilling than you'd ever imagined, and looking at it a bit longer or from a slightly different angle before jumping to seize it can provide more enriching outcomes than you thought was possible than what was in front of you to begin with. Thanks.